Hey, what's up? What's up, everybody? It's Rockin' Larry Locken here. It's really a pleasure to do my first solo talk on the What's Your Opinion channel in association with Opinion But Facts, created by the great Kenny Jackson and my new, soon-to-be new co-host of a great show. And we've got a lot of great things coming for you in store in the future. But I just kind of wanted to give a little bit of a solo talk today about how our government works because I know a lot of people, whether you're in love with our government, whether you trust it, whether you don't give a shit about it, whether you just hope it would crumble. I think it's important for people, though, to know exactly how the government structure works for various reasons, whether you want to get involved in government or whether you want to see complete change. You want to see just a complete breakdown of the system and the way we structurally run the government. Even if you're somebody like that, you need to know the parameters. You need to know the ins and outs of how it works. So let's just start off with I'm going to start talking about some of the branches of government. We'll move on to Congress, Senate, and presidential powers in a minute, but I want to get the scary part out of the way. The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is a body of 9 individuals that are basically the supreme law of the land. One of the most important reasons to vote is so that you can have a candidate in there that will put somebody on the Supreme Court that has some logic, has some sense and sanity. Right now, the way it draws down in our Supreme Court, it's 5-4, a 5-4 Republican Democrat split right down party line. And the thing about the Supreme Court is these things are lifetime appointments. Okay, these people that are appointed are going to be there until literally they pass away. I mean, they will bring them in on respirators if they have to make a vote. And and in some cases, I'm glad. I'm glad that, for instance, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is trying to hang on because even though it's a 5-4 Republican majority, one of the older Republicans is pro-abortion, so he sides with the minority on abortion issues. And if he decides to retire, or if Ruth Bader Ginsburg or something happened to Sonia Sotomayor or some of these other people, then what would end up happening right now is with a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate, you would have somebody elected that is completely of an alt-right, right-wing, ideologically religious type of thinking. And it wouldn't be very long at all. And people think this is just a scare story, but Roe v. Wade could be overturned real easily. Women, if you care about your reproductive rights, they really already got the votes to do that in the Supreme Court, and there's nothing that can be done, and then it goes to state. And if that happens, of course, it becomes a state issue, and depending on which state you're in, they have the right to either illegalize it or, keep it legal. So the Supreme Court is the law of the land. The Supreme Court can be really dangerous too. And this is going to tie into something kind of what I'm going to talk about a little bit later about the Electoral College. But in the year 2000, we had an election between George W. Bush, of course, and Al Gore. Well, Florida was up for grabs late into the evening, and it was first reported that Gore had won Florida, thus giving him the election. But not so fast. Governor Jeb Bush of Florida at the time and Secretary of State Katherine Harris said, no, all the votes aren't in. So we fast forward a few days in this debacle, and it turns out it looks like Bush has won Florida by 538 votes, if my memory serves me right. But that was enough to initiate a recount, and it was really controversial. The Republicans were bitching and complaining and whining about it and bitching. And here's the most ironic thing. They were down to just needing just a couple of more days to finish the recount. It would have been finished on this Sunday night. Well, for the first time in history, the Supreme Court decided to not only overstep their bounds, but they met on a Saturday. On a Saturday afternoon. They didn't wait till Monday. They met on a Saturday, and on a 5-4 down party line decision, ordered the recount in Florida stopped. Now, the recount continued through Sunday night anyway, just to get an unofficial total. And when it was all said and done, Al Gore had won Florida by 150 or so votes. Of course, you have a third party candidate that probably took away 20,000 votes from Gore in Florida too. Really ironically, I want to say too about that election is that it's the first presidential candidate that I can remember in history that lost, or in recent history that lost their own home state. Al Gore lost Tennessee. Ironic thing was, Al Gore only needed 3 more electoral votes to get 270 and win the presidential race. At the time, that's how many electoral votes Tennessee had. So had he won his own home state, like a candidate usually does, the point would have been mute, and it would have been a 270, 268 Gore decision versus waiting for that recount of Florida. And Florida's got like 29 electoral votes. So, that was that. And so that's just, that's kind of some of the things the Supreme Court can do. Then you've got the House and you've got the Senate. Now, a lot of people, when they think of the House, they think the term Congress. But Congress really means both the House and the Senate. Okay, so they're 2 separate legislative branches. The House has approximately 435 members, and it's based on, they come from various districts of various states, depending on how big a state is. They have a certain amount of districts where they have a congressman that represents them in the U.S. Congress. And that also ties into, too, sometimes when, I know we've got the census coming up in 2020, and sometimes what the Republicans like to do, especially in southern and midwestern areas, they like to try to do, and you'll have to look this up, that what's called gerrymandering. I'm not really going to get into explaining gerrymandering, but it's kind of a fucked up way of taking part of a state and redistricting that congressional area to where the votes in that area will, maybe will favor the Republicans a little bit more. But so getting back on topic. So you got 435 people in Congress. They have to run every 2 years. Their election is up every 2 years. Now you've got the Senate. On the other side, you've got the Senate. There's 100 members of the Senate, 2 from each state. Now, why would we have 2 from each state when you've got states that have more, you've got states that have more tumbleweeds than people, and that state has the same amount of senators as New York or Texas or California or wherever? The reason is because back when they created the Constitution, they wanted these big, huge land baron owners in the South and in the Midwest wanted to make sure that their voice was protected, that they had their voice was always going to be heard against the bigger states and all that. So they had equal representation. So what basically you got a state like Montana or Wyoming with, like I said, more tumbleweeds and dust flying by than anybody with a pulse, okay, versus a state like California, Texas, New York, Florida, that have 50, 30, 100, hundreds of times of people that some of these places have, thousands as many. And so what that does is that keeps kind of the Senate in gridlock. It's usually never more than a, 1 to 5 person majority, whether it's Republican or Democrat. And this ties into, too, I know I'm kind of all over the place, but when people talk about impeaching Donald Trump, okay, because Bill Clinton was impeached, but he wasn't thrown in office. This is what has to happen. First of all, it has to go through Congress. There's 435 members of Congress, okay? And it can be even a one vote difference to impeach, okay? So they impeach him. It goes over, at that point, he's impeached, but then it has to go over to the Senate for a trial, okay? Which when Bill Clinton went over to the Senate, they voted, they voted no. They voted completely against it. Here's the deal. You need 67 senators for impeachment, okay? I mean, it's 51-49 right now, Republican, Democrat, okay? Even if the Democrats took back over the Senate this fall, and say it was 51-49 our favor, or even if it was 50-50, which 50-50 doesn't really matter either, because when it's 50-50, whoever's vice president at the time, which would be Mike Pence, would break the tie. But like I said, you need 67 senators. So that would mean you would need every Democrat, and then you would need to pick off like anywhere from 15 to 20 Republicans. And man, I mean, I don't see it happening. And the reason too also is once the ball gets rolling on this, say like after the elections, after the new congressional season has started in January, okay, then things start really heating up. Maybe Mueller comes out with his, you got to understand these investigations take years, okay? So say sometime in March or wherever, or early summer, the Mueller findings come out. So maybe they start impeachment hearings in the Congress. Okay, by that time you're getting into late 2019. They go through the motions, takes about 6 months. It's early 2020. And then if they impeach him, then it has to go over to the Senate. And meanwhile, while this is going on, we're like in our election cycle. Okay, we're running. So, and then he also has an appeal. So he could be, it still wouldn't affect his impeachment. But by the time everything was said and done, it would be just about the time again that the election would be happening in 2020. So that's interesting. There's also what's called the 25th Amendment. If everyone on his staff agrees that he's not competent, they can sign off on a bill and have him removed. But none of his puppets would do that. I mean, my God, Mike Pence, I don't even think has well, I know he doesn't have a soul, but the guy is just, I don't know, man. The guy gives me the creeps personally. Pence gives me the creeps. I would have hated to grown up in his household. But understand this about the Senate and in the House. Okay, this is going to be my last point, really. This is how bills get passed. Okay, the Senate may take up a bill and decide, and they in each of these. Keep in mind, both bodies have several committees. Okay, they're all headed up by whoever the political power of that party is, who's ever in charge of that party, or the party in charge. And so, say the Senate drafts a bill. Okay, then they've got to send it over to the House. The House has to approve it or make amendments to it and negotiate on it. And if that happens, then it goes up to the president to sign. The president can veto it. If the president vetoes it again, then it takes 2/3 of the Senate to override it, or the Congress. I think both. That I'm not sure on. It's 2/3 of either one or both on that, as far as overriding the presidential veto. I think it might be what body initiated. Like, for instance, the Congress or the House also drafts bills, but then they have to have theirs approved by the Senate. So it goes back and forth between the two of them, and they negotiate. So you see the minutia of it all. Even if we lived in a non-corrupt, fucking non-lobbyist type of society, it sets up, what it does is it sets up the possibility of really just rigmarole of nothing getting done. But I think the important thing is that we really need to get rid of lobbyists, people like that, third parties. I would encourage people of like a real progressive third party type of mind, though, to try to stick it out a little bit and change the Democratic Party. Jill Stein is not going to be the way to go. These little parties that show up every 4 years that don't do any grassroots work actually are never going to go anywhere or get anywhere. I think, me personally, is to vote for Democrats who don't take corporate PAC money, support Democrats that are coming up and running in primaries against people like Pelosi and people like, Chuck Schumer and established Democrats. But I would take any of those any day over any Republican. So it's very important to understand that when you don't vote or you don't care what's going on, you've got 9 people on that Supreme Court that can affect your life. They could overturn gay marriage in a second. They could overturn Roe v. Wade, like I said. So just, I just kind of wanted to explain that to people, and take that in a little bit. Listen to me back if you have to kind of get what I'm saying and how it works. There's an interesting, if anybody remembers Schoolhouse Rock, I grew up in the 70s or 80s, there's a little cartoon called I'm Just a Bill. And that describes it perfectly. I'd look that up if you want to know exactly how all this shit and this minutia works, right? Okay, and then of course on state and local levels, you have the same thing. Every state has a governor and its own state Congress and state Senate and whatnot, and cities have mayors and councils, and it's just important to know all this stuff, whether you give a fuck or not, because I always ask people that want to blow the whole thing up, I'm like, okay, but what are you going to do the day after? What are you going to do the morning after? How are you going to get power to people, keep Wi-Fi on, food, keep services going? Okay? Those are things to think about. That's why, even if you really want to take down the government, you need to know exactly every boring detail you can find about how it works. And with that, I'm going to give another shout out to Kenny Jackson. I love you, brother. I know you're working hard. I appreciate everything you've done for me. And I'm sorry, the way I had to set this up, I can't see any comments if there's any comments, but feel free to leave comments afterward after I post this. So I'd like to just wish everybody much love, and let's just keep on keeping on. That's all we can do. But remember, and not just knowledge is power. Consciousness and awareness is real power. And with that, I'm out. Oh, by the way, check out our page, What's Your Opinion Show, on Facebook and Twitter. We might tweak the name of the show and the logo. We're still, Kenny and I are going to have a meeting tomorrow and kind of finalize some things. So it's been great so far, and I look forward to this being a part of this empire that Mr. Jackson is creating. Peace out, everybody. Much love.